Welcome to another episode of Life Distilled. Our guest today is Jeff Shapiro, philosopher and pilot. Hey Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm super excited about this conversation, mostly because, well, we spend a lot of time kind of considering this theme in the context of craft spirits and using craft spirits as a lens to consider the theme. Really what we're interested in exploring with this podcast and this webcast is the idea of distilling your life down to the bare essentials and what you find is most meaningful to you. And I really think that you've done that with your life from what I can see.
It's a work in progress for sure.
You bet. You
Yeah.
bet it. I bet it is. And so I'm just super excited about, when I learned about you and what you had going on and that you were local to us and that there might be the opportunity to connect with you. I was just really thrilled.
Oh yeah, like I said, I appreciate you having me. It's great. It's always a wonderful opportunity to talk about the things I love and certainly the most important parts of my life, which I think are, like you said, fairly distilled down to what I find to be important and certainly less maybe in common with how people in our country typically structure their lives, I guess.
Yeah,
not from a judgmental point of view, but from an observation point of view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, I think it is a little bit different. Again, like you said, not really to choose one or the other than in our own lives to decide for ourselves which
Sure.
of those paths we want to walk. I do think it's a little bit different than what I've seen in other folks' decision making, and maybe we can unpack that a little bit. I'm hoping to. I did want to tell a little story because I owe it to my friend who really, unbeknownst to probably you, and made this connection for us. And it's that this friend of mine, Dan Tracy, was going on a 4-day hitch with the Forest Service as a volunteer to go clear out some trail in the backcountry. And so he's sitting at Blodgett Canyon trailhead, and he's at the back of his truck at the tailgate. He's sorting his gear out, and he says, he called me up after he got out of this thing and tells me this story. He says, yeah, I see this big shadow come flying past, and it's like a huge bird's over me, and then I hear this thing like a sheet landing on the ground. I turn around and there's this guy standing there. I said, where'd you come from? And he turns around and he points up at the top of the hill at these rock bluffs, and he says, oh, I jumped off there, and if you watch, my friend's about to exit too. And so then you guys watched this other gentleman come flying down, and so Dan starts telling me, hey, there's this world-class base jumper that lives right here in Missoula that jumps the bitterroots all the time. I thought, oh no, that's very interesting. I gotta see if I can't make this guy's acquaintance.
I remember that day. It's always fun to, for me, that particular jump is really convenient and beautiful, and kind of a quick turnaround. So it's kind of my go-to if it's snowy or if I don't have a whole lot of time. And yet it's just a really wonderful experience every time. It's a really amazing just little base jump, and you land in the parking lot right next to your car, which is really pretty special, And a couple of times I've come into the parking lot and literally paralleled a rig driving down the road and almost landed in the back of the truck. And it is pretty fun to have that interaction with people, and they're sort of like, where did you come from, But yeah, that was neat, and that energy is always fun to feel after such an intense experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sure. So is base jumping your only discipline, or what other disciplines do you practice?
No, I actually started out climbing. I learned how to climb at a pretty young age, and got into it as almost a sole passion when I was 14, and when all my friends were playing soccer, football, or those types of things, I would catch rides up to Index. At the time I was going to school and growing up just north of Seattle, Washington. And I'd go rock climbing, and that for me just was like the most amazing thing that I could ever. I mean, it was outrageous. You go into the mountains and you push yourself mentally and physically, and you get high on the walls, and this gained perspective. And I mean, obviously, it's such a beautiful thing to see and experience as a developing young guy. It challenged my ego. It challenged so many things that have shaped who I am. that I'm super grateful for it. And then around, I guess I must have been 17, I think 92 or 93, I had the opportunity through a climbing friend to learn how to fly hang gliders. And flying, it was something that has always been something that I was fascinated by. Just completely curious. I mean, I did career reports as a kid on being a pilot, and that was something that I think has always been a driving fascination for me, and something that I wanted to explore, but not in the way that that really had me, wanting to fly an airplane per se. So when hang gliding, not only did at the time did I not even realize that people did that, but I had no avenue to be exposed to it, and it just came out of nowhere. And like these things, sometimes, present themselves. It was like it was a path that I could not ignore. That I had to do whatever it took to do.
Sure.
And it changed my life. If I was to look back at my life at a single choice that's shaped my life and changed my life, it would be that opportunity to learn how to fly a hang glider. And so I learned how to fly hang gliders at 17, and then chased that pretty hard, and was still climbing pretty hard. And now doing it for a living, that was never a goal of mine. I never woke up and said, "Oh, I want to be a professional athlete," or "I never want to make a living," or "I want to make a living doing this," or that was not something that I ever desired. I saw it as maybe a lucky, sort of way to live, but nothing that I was raised in a household where, you work hard and you earn your way. And that work ethic certainly translated to the things that I enjoy doing, the passions in my life. But I never in my mind saw it as a way to make my living. Those two things remained separate. But over time, traveling around the world and racing a hang glider, which is something that I sort of evolved into, led to opportunities to explore other disciplines. Climbing evolved into not just rock climbing, but ice climbing, mixed climbing, and certainly those passions have now evolved into wanting to utilize those skill sets and take all of those skill sets to the greater ranges in the world to do adventures of uncertainty in the greater ranges like the Himalayas, and then flying has hang gliding led me towards the opportunity to learn how to fly a wingsuit and to fly a paraglider and travel the world and see how other people live and discover other cultures. And certainly the people in those communities are like-minded and very adventurous souls, so that has also been a huge benefit to living this life.
Yeah, I imagine you come in contact with a lot of interesting people.
Yeah, and all of those communities are really eccentric and really diverse, and my fascination with flying also led me towards discovering this ancient art of falconry, and I've been a falconer for almost 20 years now, and that community is completely eccentric and wild. And so each of those, these groups of people, these user groups, whether it be falconry, wingsuit base jumping, hang gliding or paragliding, or alpinism, every one of them holds the most incredible people that I've ever had the opportunity to meet. And God, what an honor to live this life, but even more so to live in parallel with some of these just absolutely incredible human beings.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna, as you were talking, I was thinking, here's a question to ask, but then I kind of looked at my notes and I see it sort of segues nicely into the next question that I had, which is it'd be interesting to know what the common thread is between all those people.
Yeah.
But what I kind of think that it may be is kind of Zen, people seeking Zen. And so what I was interested in getting your perspective on was some folks practice Zen through whatever. We often look at things, look at the craft spirit space as these are folks that are trying to find their Zen in perfecting their spirit and what they're trying to do with micro distilling. You seem to practice yours in flight. How did you come to flying, and how does flying enter into, your philosophy about life?
Well, I mean, it's funny when I look back at it, because it's been something that I've participated in for more than half of my life, and in that part of my life, the amount of development has been significant. I look back at the things that drove me in the first place, and as a young male, Zen and discovery and even the recognition that curiosity were the drivers. It was actually more like ego and ambition and self-expectation and personal identity that drove those things. But I've been asked previously what I would change if I was to be able to go back 20 or 30 years or whatever, and I wouldn't change a thing about this. I wouldn't change that as reasons, because ironically, when those things drive you towards doing activities and having opportunities like I've been fortunate to have, they lead me to discover that those things actually aren't important. Those things are actually quite trivial relative to especially the risk involved in the activities that I enjoy most. So things like being present, staying curious, discovering different perspectives than my own, those begin to drive the desire to continue doing them. And certainly, as of late in particular, the connection that I have to the people that I do those things with, it feels like at this stage in my life, I'm so much more process driven than goal driven. When you say Zen, it's funny, I think, and I've also talked about this previously, you can find these things, you can find these enlightened ways of thinking, or I think you can find a quiet mind with a quiet mind. I just think it's more difficult to do. For me, it's easy to find that level of profound presence that is required when you jump off a cliff by doing that. I don't have the mental capacity to concentrate on anything other than what I'm doing right here and right now. And I think that after a very, very, very intense experience that represents flow, that represents a presence of mind and a presence of body that is hard to come by in sort of normal consciousness, the lessons learned from that enable me to appreciate life in a way that I couldn't before. And that gratitude, and certainly the humility found from how much I appreciate what I have, and just sometimes that list is one thing, and that's just breathing, like how much I appreciate just being alive. It allows me to understand what's important and what is trivial, and that's a gift. And so I only have the ability to control one thing in this world, and that's my own mind. And those activities allow me to understand that. And then also to, like I said, my interaction with the people I'm with when I'm doing these things, I sometimes that experience can feel kind of lonely. Well, if you're doing it with someone else, I can't share that experience with somebody. I can't tell someone what it feels like to jump off a cliff with a wingsuit, but I can share how that thing has changed me as a person just through my interaction with that person on a very simple level. If I do it with somebody else, I don't have to tell that person what it was like. They were there, or they did it. And it might be different in terms of perspective than my own, but oftentimes I'll look at somebody after a base jump that just landed, and their look to me is the same as I'm giving them, which is, you've seen what I've seen, and it doesn't require explanation, and that's pretty cool to share that with someone.
Absolutely. I've always kind of thought that folks that engage in high-risk activities, they do it largely, maybe they don't know this, but they largely do it just kind of, it seems like the reason you were saying, is that they can achieve this clear headspace, they can achieve this Zen mind without having to go through that same process of meditating every day or something. So it's a bit of a shortcut. And it reminds me of how some people use psychedelics to get into this
Sure.
same shared experience.
Sure, for
and I'll be willing to admit that I've had that same experience with some friends after we ate some psilocybin mushrooms.
Right.
And at the end, we didn't have to talk. We just looked at each other and we like, you
That's it.
understand what I was just doing in that space a moment ago. And they're
Right.
like, absolutely, I understand. And no words came between us.
Well,
you could see it.
Right, and I think that that's a great, there's a huge similarity in those two examples, because the chemicals that are released in your brain when you're doing very intense things, especially things that force you to at least acknowledge your own mortality, that I don't think that that's different at all, actually. I think that discovery happens within, and you know, I also think that you know, I agree with you that it is a bit of a shortcut, but I think that for me, the steps taken to get to that point of earning the right to do the activity, like you know, you can't just go climb a new route in the Himalayas, or you can't just jump off a cliff wearing a wingsuit. You have to sort of have trained to be able to earn the right to be there and do it sustainably and safely. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say safely, but sustainably. Mm-hmm. That also starts to evolve in this, in the moment transition between normal consciousness and the moment you jump off a cliff. In other words, the meditation for me doesn't just start when I zip up my arm wings and get ready to jump off the cliff. That's a really important moment during that process. But for me, you know, sort of the Zen or the art starts the moment I wake up and decide that I'm going to get out of bed, I'm going to drink coffee before the sun is up, I'm going to drive to the Bitterroot in the winter, I'm going to post hole up to a cliff by myself with the intention of jumping off of it. And it doesn't matter if I walk back down, it doesn't matter if I do it, I'm never attached to the jump. But that's where the process starts, and the essence of the experience is one step at a time. It's, don't think about the result, don't think about the end, just put one foot in front of the other and enjoy every moment of it. And so, you know, I get out of the car and close the door, and it's complete silence, and the sun's cracking over the sapphires, and I shoulder my stash bag with my wingsuit and my rig in it, and I'm totally alone, and the crunch of the snow under my feet as I'm walking towards the ridgeline to walk up to this cliff, and the bite of the wind and how cold it is, and the fact that I'm acutely aware that no one else is around. That's all part of that. And I'm definitely not in a normal headspace when I'm doing that. So it's
sure.
It's cool. It is. It's a bit. It's really, to me, it's no different than sitting on my deck in the springtime sun and closing my eyes and trying to allow thoughts to come in and leave as they do, which is, you know, what I guess could be considered traditional meditation or that sort of, you know. But yeah, it's benefited my life a lot.
Yeah, and I don't mean to downplay that particular art at all, or
Yeah.
practice or way of going about that, because I think you're exactly right. It maybe the first time you jump off a cliff, whether it's a 10-footer and you're jumping in the river or you're doing something more meaningful, the first time it opens your mind to this Zen mind, and then you see, wow,
Sure.
there's this moment of clear headspace. I want to achieve that again. From that moment forward, just whether you're a monk practicing, you know, at the temple, or you continue moving on from, like you did, from climbing up to wingsuit flying, then it's just the practice. The practice goes on for life.
And that's it. That's the interesting part of this, is that in the way that I think you meant it, it is a bit of a shortcut, being that it's such a profound experience to jump off a cliff that you are forced into this very, very special space. But just like any skill, the more you train, the more you are able to utilize those skills in other parts of your life. And for me, I think it's important to note, certainly it's applied to my trail running, to writing. It doesn't have to be these really intense, like life-threatening things. I mean, it can be whatever inspires you.
Absolutely.
And that's the beautiful part. It's like what we were talking about earlier with climbing. It doesn't matter if you're climbing 5'7" or 5'15". If you're trying hard, you're having the same experience, which is why climbers can communicate so effectively no matter what skill set level that they're at, or experience based. So I think that what is useful for me to convey is that it doesn't matter if you're running 5Ks or flying an F-16. If you can find value in what it is that you're doing relative to the presence of mind while you're doing it, to discover what fulfills you as a human being, and in a way that allows you to share that with a positive interaction, the people that you care about, then you're living well, And for me, that's certainly been a realization that's driven me to continue searching, to continue sort of on this path.
I love what you said earlier about things that become process driven, not goal oriented. Because so I learned about Jeff Shapiro. First thing I do is I Google him on the internet, and I find these videos. Well, to me now, the video and you and flying, the exit, the landing, that's what this is all about, right? That's the culmination of it. That was the goal. That's what you created. With the guys that are making the craft spirits, to most people, it's that bottle that they pick off the shelf and they take home. Well, that's what this guy's doing. But really, when you start to really unpack this thing, you come to find out, no, it's that entire process that Ryan Montgomery went through to get that bottle into your hands. That's actually the most important part.
For sure. It's really interesting. I'll quote him because, I think what he says is not only brilliant, but it makes total sense. You see some of these really famous now are put together as short videos with Alan Watts speaking in the background. And, he makes an important point. The most beautiful parts of art, and to me, my base jumping or my climbing or my flying is a way to express myself. It's the way I practice my art. And art is like music. The goal of music, the goal of a symphony, the goal of a song is not to have it be over. It's to play it. It's to do it. It's like dancing. You don't. And Alan Watts uses both of those as examples. Your goal to dance is not to finish. It's to dance.
Absolutely.
And so I think that applied to life is a pretty important way for me to apply to my path.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just a critical thing to try to help people understand.
Yeah.
As you were saying about the 5K, it's a great example. You get to the end of a 5K and people want to look at the standings and who beat who and what was your time. But to that person who's never ran a 5K, like that was an incredible thing.
Sure.
And every step of that and that process that they went through to just accomplish it, to be a part of that, is so much more meaningful than whether or not they were in the top 20 or the bottom 20.
Absolutely.
It's really a great thing. You kind of already touched on it as one of my questions I had, but I would say that you're a philosopher, Jeff. That would be the way I would describe you if somebody asked me, hey, who's this Jeff Shapiro guy? Well, he's kind of like Jerry Seinfeld. He's a philosopher.
Jerry Seinfeld. I would call myself more like what Marcus Aurelius says. I'm an imperfect practitioner of someone else's philosophy, but I'm trying real hard.
There you go. There you go. But then you answered it because I was going to ask you, do you consider yourself an artist or an athlete or just a guy walking the path? But you kind of answered that.
I mean, man, I'm just Jeff. I just am doing my very best to figure out what is my truth and to walk it. And sometimes those lines are blurry. And what's interesting, maybe applied to this podcast in particular, being that it might be that some of your listeners are considering what they do for a living or how they relate what they love about life to the way that they make their living. Sometimes, like I said, those lines are a bit blurry. What is the truth? Who are you? Who are we? These are questions that we ask ourselves on a regular basis. And what is the purpose of life? And when you wake up in the morning, do you have something that motivates you, that's inspiring, that drives you? And once again, driving you towards what? Is it a goal? And is the goal the important part, or is it the walk?